We're just going to do a little practice here with set builder and interval notation. So this is what we call set builder notation. We usually use what we call braces, or I sometimes refer to them as squiggly brackets. And this notation can look a little bit weird when you first see it, but we just know that anytime they use braces or squiggly brackets, that just denotes a set. So this is just saying the set of, and then this first x here means all x's, right? So the set of all x's, and then this line means such that. So this is just a fancy mathematical way of saying that this is the set of all x's such that x is greater than 2, right? Or a fancy way of saying the set of all numbers that are greater than 2. So that is our set builder notation. And if we want to plot this on a number line, then just someplace on our number line, we would put a tick mark for 2. And then for greater than, there's a couple ways you can do this. Probably the first method you would have learned in school is to use an open circle for greater than, right? Because we're not including it, right? So greater than is going to be to the right. So we want all the numbers that are greater than 2, and we put an arrow on the end. But I use an open circle because I'm not actually including 2, right? Because 2 is not greater than itself. So I'm including everything greater than 2. I'm including 3, I'm including 4, I'm including 2.5, I'm including 2.00001. I'm just not including 2 itself, because this just says greater than, it doesn't have that or equal to part. So this is probably the first way you would have seen it in school, but then eventually, instead of using open and closed circles, we use parentheses and brackets. And so if we use a parentheses, that means the same thing as an open circle. It means we're not including the number itself, right? We are including everything up to 2, right? So everything bigger than 2, even if it's really, really close, 2.0000001, but we're not including 2 itself. So I really like to look at the number line when I write interval notation, because basically in order to write interval notation, you're essentially just going to read your number line from left to right. So if I read my number line here from left to right, I can see that this has started. I'm kind of doing air quotes for started because it doesn't really, but it kind of starts at 2, right? And so it's the interval that starts at 2 and then it ends, and this is where I'm using air quotes, because this definitely doesn't really end because the arrow goes forever. So we would say that ends at positive infinity. Of course, it doesn't really end. So this is what interval notation looks like, is you're just saying, I'm going to say it's the interval from, I'm going to put my starting point and then a comma and my ending point. So this is the interval from 2 to infinity. And then we put symbols around that, either parentheses or brackets. Since we were not including 2, we would use a parentheses. And we never include infinity or positive or negative infinity, because you can never really get there. So how could you include it, right? As soon as you think you've gotten to infinity, you could go a little further, and so you didn't really get there. So we never include infinity, so we'll always use parentheses with either negative infinity or positive infinity. So that's our interval notation here. And you can do this above like I have, or you can also do it right on the number line, and that is also correct. So if you wanted to kind of do it that way, that would work. All right, so if we look at the next one, they've given us a number line, and then we're going to fill in both set builder and interval notation here. So this one, we can see that they have used a square bracket instead of a parentheses. So the only difference between a square bracket and a parentheses is whether you actually include the number itself. So this one, I can see that since it's a bracket instead of a parentheses, I'm actually including the number -5, which is where this one starts. So you may have done this at one point with a filled in circle, and that's the same thing, right? So I'm doing the interval from -5 all the way out to positive infinity. So I'm going to put my symbol for infinity. Again, we can never really include infinity, so I'm going to use a parentheses there, but we are including the -5, so that means I would use a square bracket there. So the interval from -5 to infinity. We always do it left to right, right? So you would not say, it would not be correct if you did infinity to -5, would not be the correct way to do this, right? So then to go back to our set builder notation, we would simply say this is the set of all x's such that x is, so this was greater than -5, but we were including it. So that means we're going to put that or equal to symbol. So greater than or equal to -5 and then end my braces. So basically, anytime we use a greater than or a less than symbol, we would use parentheses. And then anytime we would use a greater than or equal to or a less than or equal to, we use the square brackets. So let's go to the next one. This one, they give us the interval notation. They're saying it's the interval that air quote starts at -infinity and goes to -7, right? And so we would say someplace on here, I'm going to put -7. And this is going from, left to right, -infinity to -7. So that means that the arrow is going all the way to the left forever and then to -7. Notice that they've got parentheses on both of these. Now, of course, they should always have parentheses on the infinity or -infinity, but then they've also got a parentheses on the -7. So that's my number line. And then to write this in set builder notation, since it used a parentheses, that means I'm not actually including the -7. I'm including everything less than that, right? I'm including -7.00000000001. I'm including, -8. I'm including -7.2, right? But I'm not including -7 itself. So I would say that x is less than -7. So it does not have the or equal to on that one. If we look at the next one, they give us the interval notation. So they're telling us this is the set of all x's such that x is less than or equal to -9. So someplace on here, I'm going to put my -9. This is less than, so it is going to go to the left, but it's less than or equal to, which means I'm including -9. So everything that's less than -9, like -10, -20, but I'm also including -9 in that. So I use the square brackets. And so if I just read my number line from left to right, it starts, again, air quotes, starts at -infinity and goes to -9. I don't ever include my infinities, but I am including here the -9, which is why I use the square braces. All right, so this is the basic idea, differences between parentheses and square brackets, and these different notations. Let's look at some that have a little bit more going on. So if we look at this next one, this is the set of all x's such that x is greater than or equal to 3, or it's less than -2. So we have two pieces here, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put somewhere on my number line, I'm going to put -2. And then someplace to the right of that, I'm going to put +3 because those are my two numbers. And so I'm just going to take this first piece. So x is greater than or equal to 3 would start at 3 and go all the way out to infinity. And since it has the greater than or equal to, that's going to be a square bracket. And then I have x is less than -2 is the other piece of this. So less than is going to be to the left of that. And since it doesn't have the or equal to there, I'm just going to use a parenthesis. So I'm not including the -2, but I am including +3. And so if I read my number line from left to right, right? So where am I starting, air quotes starting on the left? I'm starting out here at -infinity. And then I stop at -2. And for both of those, I'm not including them, so I'm going to use parentheses. But then it picks up again. So then this is where I use the union symbol. And it picks up again at 3 and goes all the way out to +infinity. I don't include the infinity, but here I do have a bracket to include the +3. So it has two pieces there, which is why I use that union symbol. All right, and then this next one, you can see that there's actually no arrows here. So there's not going to be infinities or negative infinities on this one. This is, if I read my number line, it is starting at -5 and stopping at 0. So my interval notation would be pretty simple, would just be the interval from -5 to 0. And I just use the same symbols they've been using. They use a bracket on -5 and a parentheses on 0. So this means I am including all the numbers in between -5 and 0, including -5, but not including 0. So all the fractions and decimals and whole numbers, all the numbers in between there. And so then the mathematical way to write this, it's a little bit weird, but we would say, first of all, it's the set of all x's such that, and then what you would do is you would start with a smaller number, and then you're going to put your symbol in here. So I'm going to always use less thans or less than or equal to's when I do it this way. So I'm going to say -5 is less than or equal to x, which is less than 0. So this, putting x in between two numbers like that, is just a fancy way of saying x is in between those two numbers. So this is just a mathematical way of saying that it's between those two, it's between -5 and 0, but notice that I used an or equal to here because it was a bracket or a square brace, and then this one I did not use the or equal to, I just used the less than symbol. So when you do this, you always use less thans or less than or equal to. You would not use greater thans because we always go left to right. So I'm starting on the left and going to the right. So we're just saying that -5 is smaller than whatever my number is, smaller or equal to, and whatever that is less than 0.